Sometimes, the deepest wounds come from those closest to us. Welcome to our channel, where real stories come to life. For 58 years, I believed in unconditional family love until a cold, rainy night when my daughter's apartment door slammed shut behind me, and I stood alone on the sidewalk with two worn suitcases, all that remained of my life. We didn't sign up for extra mouths to feed. My son-in-law's words still echo. But what hurt more was Amanda's silence, my daughter choosing her husband over her recently widowed mother. They thought I was old, weak, useless, a burden. They didn't know life had one last card for me to play. My name is Margaret Pierce, and this isn't a story about revenge, it's about justice, about realizing that sometimes you must lose everything to find who you truly are. The night they pushed me out like broken furniture, they created something they could never control. A woman with nothing left to lose. If you've ever felt overlooked or taken for granted by those closest to you, this story might just give you the courage to make a change. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and don't forget to subscribe if this resonates with you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. I never thought I'd be left out in the cold by my own daughter. I never imagined the man she married would strip me of my dignity in my lowest moment, and that she would let him. But what they didn't know was that life had one last card for me to play. And when I played it, everything changed. My name is Margaret. I'm 58 years old. And until not long ago, I believed in something called unconditional love, especially when it came to family. I built my life around my husband Robert and our daughter Amanda. For 30 years, I taught at Cedar Park Elementary, molding young minds while maintaining our modest home. Every holiday I planned, every dollar I saved was for them. When Robert was diagnosed with cancer 5 years ago, I took early retirement to care for him. We thought we had more time, that the treatments would work. They didn't. When he passed last year, it felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. The grief was a weight I carried everywhere, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. But I told myself I still had Amanda. I still had my daughter. I couldn't afford to keep our house on my reduced pension. The property taxes alone were eating away at my savings, not to mention the medical bills that remained after Robert's insurance had done its part. So I sold the house we had shared for decades, too many memories. Too many nights waking up expecting to hear his voice calling from the kitchen. Amanda and her husband, Chad, offered me a place to stay until I got back on my feet, or at least Amanda did. Chad barely looked up from his phone when I moved in. Chad works in finance investment banking. He's the type of man who checks the stock market before he kisses his wife good morning. Ambitious, polished, with the kind of confidence that walks into a room before he does. He and Amanda met at a charity gala 4 years ago. 6 months later, they were married at the Four Seasons. I remember thinking then that he moved too fast, wanted too much. But Amanda was in love, and who was I to question that I gave them half of what I made on the house sale as my contribution toward rent and expenses? I wasn't going to be a burden. I tried not to make waves. I kept to my small room in the back of their apartment. I cooked, cleaned, offered to run errands, trying to be helpful, trying to stay out of the way. But Chad had a way of making me feel unwanted. His eyes always carried this irritation, like I was a splinter under his skin. It started with small things. He'd roll his eyes if I asked a question at dinner. He'd change the TV channel when I was mid-show. Once, I heard him mutter freeloader under his breath as he passed me in the hall. I tried to convince myself I'd misheard, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. Amanda said nothing. I'd look to her for backup, for a word, anything, but she always played it down. "He's stressed," she'd say. His boss has been writing him about the Henderson account. Just give him space. I swallowed the shame and stayed quiet. That's what mothers do, right? That night, though, that one night, it shattered me. We were at the dinner table. I had made Chad's favorite, chicken pot pie from scratch. Amanda was scrolling on her phone. Chad was sipping beer like he always did. The silence was heavy. Chad had come home late, jaw tight, movements stiff. I'd overheard him on the phone in the hallway, something about missing projections and his director being furious. When he sat down, I could feel the anger radiating off him in waves. Then, out of nowhere, he looked up from his plate and said, "You know, maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." Amanda froze. I stared at him. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. He smirked. "I mean, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working. You're not contributing enough. We've got bills. We didn't sign up for extra mouths to feed." My breath caught. My heart was pounding as I turned to Amanda, desperate for her to say something, to defend me. Amanda wouldn't meet my eyes. "Maybe it's best," she mumbled, "if you find something more stable. For everyone's sake." Everyone's sake. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I stood up, walked to my room, and packed my things. 2 suitcases. That's all I had left of my life. I didn't even cry while I packed. The tears came later when I stood outside their building, the wind biting through my coat, and realized I had nowhere to go. Amanda didn't walk me out. Chad didn't even bother pretending to care. I sat on the curb for an hour, my phone battery dead, my heart too. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to be erased. That night, I checked into a motel, the kind where the wallpaper peels and the vending machine eats your change. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything could turn so cold, wondering what I had done to deserve this kind of abandonment. The next morning, I sent Amanda a message. "I understand. I love you always." No reply. The next week, I sent another, then another. Updates about where I was staying. A question about her work project she'd mentioned. Nothing but silence in return. 3 months passed. Each day felt longer than the last. I tried applying for jobs, anything, but no one wanted to hire a grieving widow in her late 50s with a 5-year gap in her work history. I considered cleaning houses, babysitting, but my body didn't move the way it used to after so many nights sleeping on that motel mattress. My savings were dwindling. I'd already spent most of what remained from the house sale on the first few months of motel rooms and food. The loneliness was suffocating, and worse than that, the shame. I had given everything to that girl. How could she turn her back so easily one evening, as I was going through a box of old family keepsakes, trying to feel close to something, anything? I found it. My mother's old diary. I hadn't read it in years, maybe never. My mother died when I was just 8, leaving me with memories that grew fainter with each passing year. My Aunt Clara raised me, but she rarely spoke of her younger sister, as if the pain was still too raw. The diary was the only thing I had that was truly my mother's. I'd carried it from home to home, a small piece of Eleanor Pierce that I could hold in my hands, but I'd never had the courage to read it, fearing I wouldn't recognize the woman in those pages. That night, though, sitting on the edge of that motel bed, something pulled me to open it. I turned the pages carefully, her handwriting looping across the yellowed paper. At first, it was ordinary stuff weather, church, complaints about grocery prices rising again. But then I got to an entry dated June 15th, 1966. "He came again today, said he wished things were different, that he wished I could be his wife, but he has a family, a business, a name to protect. Margaret will never know. She must never know." I just pray one day she understands how much I loved her, even if she was born out of mistake and desire. I read it twice. Then again, she must never know. My breath caught in my chest. I flipped further. Entry after entry hints, memories, meetings at hotels, small cash payments she tried to refuse but needed desperately. She never named him in full, only initials HJS. But then another entry from February 1967, he said he'd made arrangements that if anything ever happened to him, he'd ensure Margaret had something a part of what he built. It won't be official, of course. It's too dangerous. But he promised me a trust, a letter. He said his lawyer would know, a Mr. Goldstein. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. Goldstein, a name I'd never heard before, yet it felt significant. The man I had always believed was my father, Thomas Pierce, had been a factory worker who died in an accident when I was 4. I had only the vaguest memories of him alive, the smell of cigarettes and aftershave, strong hands lifting me up. But HJS, who was he? It took me 2 days and several online searches from the motel's shared computer, but I found a possibility that made my heart race. Harold James Sterling, founder of Sterling Energy, one of the biggest oil firms in Central Texas from the 1950s through the 1980s. A man with a family, a reputation, a legacy, a man who had died 15 years ago at the age of 82. Could it be? Could he be my biological father? I searched for more information about Leonard Goldstein, finding him listed as a retired estate lawyer, still residing in Dallas, according to his LinkedIn profile. I couldn't call my hands trembled too much. Instead, I wrote a letter, a real handwritten letter, explaining who I was, who my mother was, and asking, begging, for a conversation. I used the last of that week's food money to mail it with tracking. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, an elderly voice spoke. "Is this Margaret Pierce, the daughter of Eleanor?" "Yes," I whispered, my heart in my throat. "This is Leonard Goldstein. I received your letter." There was a pause. "I always wondered if you'd reach out someday. There's something you need to see." I took a Greyhound to Dallas the next morning. My suitcase was half packed, just in case he turned out to be some scam artist. But when I walked into that quiet office filled with old books and even older silence, I knew it was real. He handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, fragile as a dried leaf. It was addressed simply, "To my daughter, Margaret Louise." I couldn't read the whole thing in one go. I cried before the second paragraph. Harold James Sterling admitted everything. The affair, the regret, the silent love, and then the promise, "In the event of my death, I have insured a portion of my personal assets, untraceable through my estate, are to be delivered to you via Mr. Goldstein. You are my blood, and though I was too much a coward to claim you in life, I claim you now in death." Mr. Goldstein slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank accounts, a modest investment portfolio, ownership papers, titles. The total value was just over $300,000. It was set up as a trust, Goldstein explained. It's earned interest for many years. He wanted to leave more, but was afraid his family would contest it if it was too substantial. This flew under the radar. I stared at the papers, then at him. "This is real," I whispered. He nodded. "It's yours. Always was." My heart thundered, not because of the money, but because for the first time in my life, I felt chosen, seen. I didn't scream or laugh or break down. I just sat there, quiet as a whisper, letting the truth wash over me like a long-awaited rain. That night in my motel room, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling like I had for months, but this time, with a smile creeping onto my face, they thought they discarded me, They thought I was done, but they had no idea. I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. I didn't return to Austin right away. Something inside me had shifted permanently. I wasn't just Margaret, the forgotten mother anymore. I was someone new now, someone who had been lied to her entire life and finally saw the truth. I stayed in Dallas for a few more days, just walking through neighborhoods, sipping coffee in silence, watching people live their lives, people who hadn't been tossed aside like I had. And for the first time, I didn't envy them. I studied them. Leonard Goldstein didn't just give me the inheritance. He gave me time to process, time to understand what I now held in my hands. It wasn't just wealth, it was power, and I had no idea what to do with it. When I returned to Austin, I didn't go back to the motel. I found a small but clean apartment in a decent neighborhood. I bought new clothes, nothing flashy, just dignified. I cut my hair, started wearing it in a style that framed my face better. Small changes, but I could see them adding up when I looked in the mirror. Make 10. On Goldstein's recommendation, I met with a financial advisor, a woman named Diane who specialized in helping people manage unexpected windfalls. She didn't bat an eye when I told her my story. "You'd be surprised how many secrets come out after someone dies," she said, organizing the paperwork spread across her desk. "The question is, what do you want to do with this money? How do you want it to change your life?" I thought about Amanda, about Chad, about the humiliation of being called an extra mouth. The anger was still there, burning in my chest, but I knew acting on pure emotion would only lead to more pain. "I want security," I said finally, "and I want to build something that's mine." Diane nodded and outlined a plan: investments, a small retirement account, setting aside funds for education. Education, I asked. "You're only 58, Margaret. You could have another career if you wanted, or at least take some courses to explore your interests." I hadn't considered that possibility. For so long, I'd been defined by others: Robert's wife, Amanda's mother, and now Harold Sterling's secret daughter. But who was I beyond those labels? I began taking classes at the community center, basic business principles, computer skills, even a creative writing workshop. I met other women my age, some divorced, some widowed, all looking for a new chapter. For the first time in months, I had conversations that didn't leave me feeling hollow. One evening after class, I went for coffee with a woman named Rachel, a former real estate agent who now taught at the community center. "Property is still one of the best investments," she was saying as we sat at a small cafe. "Especially in Austin. The market keeps climbing." I nodded, thinking about the apartment I was renting. "I've been considering buying a small place instead of renting, but I'm not sure where to start." Rachel's eyes lit up. "I still keep tabs on some interesting properties. There's actually a multi-unit building that's coming up for sale soon. The current owner is underwater on taxes. It's in East Austin, not far from downtown." My interest was piqued. "What's the address?" When she told me, my coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. It was the address of Amanda and Chad's building. "Is something wrong?" Rachel asked. I set the cup down carefully. "No, just, I know that building. It's a good property, just needs better management. The company handling it now is letting things slide. The owner is based in California, rarely visits. That's why it's going up for a bank auction next month." My mind was racing. Could this be possible? Could I actually buy the building where Amanda and Chad lived, where they had kicked me out with 2 suitcases and a hollow excuse? I tried to keep my voice casual. "Would you mind sending me the details? I might be interested." That night, I called Diane and explained the situation, not the personal connection, just the investment opportunity. She was cautiously optimistic. "Multi-unit residential can be a good investment if the numbers work," she said. But property management is no small task. I wouldn't manage it myself, I said quickly. I'd keep the current management company or find a better one. Send me the listing information, and I'll run some projections for you. Over the next few weeks, I did my research. The building had 12 units, was built in the 1990s, and was structurally sound but needed cosmetic updates. The current owner was indeed facing tax issues and had taken out a second mortgage he couldn't afford. With Diane's help and a small loan to supplement my inheritance, I formed ML Holdings, LLC Margaret Louise, my real name. I filed all the paperwork, transferred the funds, and prepared for the auction. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking control of something, proving to myself that I could build rather than just survive. If Amanda and Chad happened to be affected, well, that was simply the universe balancing its scales. The auction came and went. There were other bidders, but none as determined as I was. And just like that, I owned the building where they lived, where they had kicked me out with 2 suitcases and a hollow excuse. I remember sitting at my desk, looking at the deed, and whispering aloud, "Let's see how Chad likes paying rent to a mouth he couldn't feed." I hired Westlake Property Management, a company with a solid reputation, to handle the day-to-day operations. I made it clear that I wanted to remain anonymous to the tenants, at least for now. "We'll need to increase rents," my new property manager, Michael, explained during our first meeting. "The current rates are below market value, and if we're going to fund the improvements this place needs, we'll have to adjust." I nodded. "How much of an increase are we talking about?" "For most units, I'd recommend 15–20%. It's substantial, but not unreasonable given the planned improvements." And I scanned the list of tenants until I found their names. Unit 8B, Chad and Amanda Harmon. "And this unit here?" I said, pointing to their apartment. "What about that one?" Michael looked at the lease. Yes, this one has an escalation clause that the other units don't have. The previous owner never enforced it, but legally, we could raise it by as much as 50% with proper notice." My heart skipped. Escalation clause. Yes, it's right here in the lease they signed. In the event of significant building improvements or change of ownership, rent can be adjusted up to 50% with 30 days' notice. I kept my face neutral. "I see. Then we should enforce all contractual terms equally, shouldn't we?" "Of course," Michael agreed. "We'll send out notices to all tenants next week." And so the notifications were sent. Rents would be reassessed, lease terms reviewed. And for Chad and Amanda, the new amount was 50% higher, along with information about the planned improvements that justified the increase. He must have exploded. I didn't need to see it to know. I could feel the rage from miles away. But it wasn't about money. It was about pride. Chad was a man who needed to feel in control, and I had just pulled the rug out from under him silently, legally, completely. Amanda tried to call me 2 days after the notice. It was the first time she had reached out since the night I left. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom," her voice was strained. "I don't know if you heard, but something weird's going on. Our rent just shot up like crazy. Chad's losing it. I don't know. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about gravity. They needed to feel the weight of their choices. I didn't realize how much I had changed until I saw Amanda at the grocery store 3 weeks after the rent increase. Boy, She didn't see me at first. I was 2 aisles over, hidden behind a rack of discounted cereal. She looked tired, not just tired, worn down. Her hair was tied back sloppily, the way she used to do when she'd been crying. Her cart was half empty, mostly cheap Staples rice, eggs, a few off-brand cans. I should have walked away. I didn't. I followed her through the store at a distance, heart pounding like I was doing something wrong. She paused in front of a small box of organic granola, the kind she always used to buy. Then she looked down at her phone, perhaps checking her bank balance. Her shoulders sank. She put the box back. That moment broke me. Not because I pitied her, but because I remembered the little girl who used to run to me crying when she scraped her knee, the one who asked me every night to check for monsters under her bed, and now she was living with one. I drove home that day and sat on the couch in silence for hours. I stared out the window, thinking about how life had twisted us into strangers. But I reminded myself this wasn't punishment. This was consequence, and consequence was long overdue. Meanwhile, I continued to build my new life. I joined a women's business networking group, took more advanced classes in finance and property management, and even started volunteering at a women's shelter on weekends, something I found deeply fulfilling. The women there had stories that made mine seem almost fortunate by comparison. "You have a gift," the shelter director told me one day. "The way you listen to these women, the way you help them make plans. Have you ever considered counseling?" I laughed softly. "I'm a bit old to start a new career, don't you think?" She shook her head. "You're exactly the right age. You have experience, wisdom. Sometimes the best guides are those who've walked through fire themselves." Her words stayed with me, planting a seed I wasn't ready to nurture just yet. The reports from the property management company showed that improvements to the building were underway. New exterior paint, updated hallway lighting, improved landscaping. Chad's angry emails about the rent increase were filed away, each one more desperate than the last. The other tenants had adjusted to the modest increases, especially as they began to see the improvements taking shape. But word came back that tensions in Unit 8B were rising. A neighbor had complained about shouting late at night. The maintenance man reported that Chad had been hostile during a routine inspection, and Amanda had been seen crying on the back steps one afternoon. They were unraveling from the inside out, and I didn't have to say a single word. I was sitting at home one evening, reading through the latest financial reports Diane had prepared for me, when my doorbell rang. It was unusual. I rarely had visitors, especially unannounced ones. When I opened the door, Amanda stood there, soaked from the rain, a grocery bag clutched to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were red, and when she opened her mouth, nothing came out. She looked like she had run out of words days ago. I stepped aside without speaking. She walked in slowly, dripping water onto my hardwood floor. I handed her a towel and we moved in silence. I warmed the kettle, poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She sat on the edge of the couch like she didn't want to stay long, like she didn't deserve to. And maybe she didn't. She stared into her cup, eyes hollow. "He's not who I thought he was," she said finally. I stayed quiet. I mean, I knew. Part of me always knew. But I told myself it was stress, that he just needed support, that if I was patient, he'd come around. Still, I said nothing. I needed her to say it all without prompting, without rescue. She looked up, her voice trembling. "He thinks someone's targeting us. He's obsessed with finding out who bought our building. He's been going through my phone, my emails." A shiver ran through her, and not from the cold. "He asked if I was hiding something, if you were hiding something." That caught my breath. She didn't wait for an answer. "I told him I hadn't spoken to you in weeks, that I didn't even know where you were." She paused. But that was a lie. I met her eyes for the first time. "How did you find me?" "Sarah Keller. From your book club, I ran into her at the farmer's market. She mentioned seeing you at your new place." Amanda's eyes darted around the apartment. "It's nice. Better than Chad's place," I supplied. She flinched. I miss you, she whispered, but I don't even know how to be around you anymore. My hand tightened around the mug. You left me with nowhere to go, Amanda. I know, she said, voice cracking. I let him push you out. No, Amanda, I said firmly. You didn't let him. You stood with him. That stopped her cold. She blinked, her lips parted slightly like she wanted to deny it, to defend herself. But there was nothing left to defend. I stood up, walked to the window, stared out into the night. I begged for your voice that night. Just one word, just one, and you stayed silent. Behind me, I heard her exhale a quiet, broken sound. I didn't think it would get this bad, she said. I thought I could manage him. I thought if I just loved him enough. You can't manage a man like that, I said softly. You survive him or you leave him. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. We sat in silence for a long time, two women who shared blood but not trust. Not yet. Maybe never. When she finally stood to leave, she set the mug down carefully, her eyes rimmed with unshed tears. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just needed to remember what it felt like to be safe. I walked her to the door. She paused, then turned back suddenly and wrapped her arms around me. I didn't return the hug at first. Then I did, but gently, cautiously, like someone trying to hold a memory without letting it slip through their fingers. When she pulled back, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me one last time and left. And as the door closed behind her, I felt something shift deep in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faintest flicker of something that might one day grow into it if she let it. The invitation went out on a Tuesday morning quietly, professionally, without fanfare. Building community meeting to discuss upcoming renovations scheduled in the common room next week. Attendance encouraged. Questions welcome. I knew Chad would be there. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist. He wanted a name, a face, someone to point a finger at. He had no idea he'd be walking right into the hands of the woman he'd discarded like a broken appliance. The day of the meeting, I arrived early. I wore a charcoal gray blazer and dark jeans, simple, elegant, confident. My hair, now in soft waves, brushed my shoulders. I looked nothing like the woman who had once begged for a sliver of dignity at Amanda's kitchen table. The common room filled slowly. Tenants trickled in, some curious, others annoyed, most indifferent. And then came Chad. He stormed in with the swagger of a man expecting confrontation, Amanda trailing behind him like a shadow. He didn't look around, didn't notice me sitting quietly toward the back. He only saw the property manager at the front and went straight to him. "Where is the owner?" he demanded. "I want to speak to whoever's in charge." Michael remained calm. "All questions will be addressed during the presentation." Chad scoffed. Amanda looked down at her shoes. The presentation began routine announcements, upgrades, timelines, the new security system, the updated landscaping, the improved insulation, practical changes, smart decisions, all funded in part by the very rent increases Chad had so bitterly protested. Then Michael paused. "We'd like to thank ML Holdings for their commitment to revitalizing the property and prioritizing tenant comfort. The owner is actually here today. Should anyone have questions?" I stood up. The room turned. I walked slowly toward the front, calm, steady, every step a quiet drumbeat in my chest. Chad's face twisted in confusion, then disbelief. Amanda's mouth parted in shock. I turned to the room. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Margaret Louise. I'm the owner of this building." You could hear a pin drop. Chad stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. This is a joke. What kind of game is this?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the cracks he had tried to hide, the sweat behind his collar, the puffiness under his eyes, the panic. "No game," I said softly. "Just business." He took a step forward. "You manipulated this. You've been behind this the whole time. You raised our rent. You're trying to ruin us." I held my ground. "I gave you a roof. I made improvements. I treated every tenant equally. What I didn't do was forget." He opened his mouth to speak, but I turned back to the group. "If anyone has questions about the changes or improvements, I'm happy to answer them after the meeting. Thank you." I stepped aside. The meeting resumed, but the tension never left the air. Chad didn't sit down. He just stood there, trembling, furious. Amanda sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes wide and wet. When the meeting ended, tenants came to me, shaking hands, asking questions, thanking me for the improvements. Some had suspected I was connected to the property. Most had no idea. Chad waited until the room emptied. Then he marched toward me. "You think you've won," he hissed. This is nothing. You've made an enemy." I stared at him, eyes level. "No, Chad, I didn't make anything. You did. The day you looked me in the eye and treated me like I didn't matter." Amanda stepped between us. "Chad, stop." He turned to her, shocked. "What did you just—" I said, "Stop." She repeated, louder this time. "She's not your enemy. She never was. You are." He looked at her like she'd struck him, and in a way, she had. Amanda turned to me, her voice trembling. "I didn't know, I swear, about the building, the money, any of it." I nodded. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you had to see it, not just hear it." She blinked back tears. Chad scoffed, stepping back. "You two deserve each other." "No," I said quietly. "She deserves better." Then I turned and walked away. And for the first time since that awful night in their kitchen, I felt something shift inside me. Not revenge, not satisfaction, but power. Quiet, firm, and entirely mine. Amanda showed up at my door again 4 days later, this time holding something in her hands that made my knees buckle the second I saw it, a book. Faded leather, corner torn, the spine barely holding, my mother's diary. I opened the door without a word. She stepped in, eyes wide, her breath shaky, facial. "I found it in my closet," she said. "The last time I visited you, it must have fallen out of your bag." She placed it on the coffee table like it was sacred. And for me, it was. I read it. My heart stopped. I wasn't trying to pry. She rushed on. But I recognized her handwriting. I was looking for something that made sense. Silence fell between us, heavy, still. "I didn't know about Harold Sterling," she whispered, "or the money, or the trust, or any of it." I nodded once, slowly. I didn't know either, not until I had nothing else to lose. Her voice broke. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe you were helpless?" I looked her in the eye, and for once, she didn't look away. "Because I was helpless, the night you closed the door on me. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have money. I didn't even have a place to cry where someone wouldn't knock and tell me to keep it down." Amanda winced. "That diary," I continued, "it didn't just tell me who I was. It reminded me that I mattered, that my mother didn't just love me, she fought for me, silently, without ever being able to show it." Amanda sat down, hands clenched in her lap. "I don't know how I became the kind of daughter who could do what I did. I keep asking myself that over and over." I walked to the window, stared out at the street below, the quiet hum of life passing by. "You didn't become her all at once," I said. "It was small choices, letting things slide, choosing peace over truth, believing love meant loyalty, even when it hurt." She stood and walked toward me. "I've left him." The words hit the air like a bomb. He tried to go through my things again, my laptop, my bag. I told him no, that was it. He screamed, packed a bag, and left. Said he'd be back. I changed the locks the next day. I turned to her, stunned. Where are you staying? With Jen from work? Just for now? She looked down at her hands. I don't know who I am without him, she admitted, voice trembling. But I'd rather find out than keep disappearing. A silence passed between us, thick with everything we hadn't said. Then she looked down at the diary, resting on the table between us. You didn't deserve what we did. I can't fix that, but I want to try. I walked back to her slowly, sat down beside her. I used to dream about hearing those words, I said. But when you say them now, they don't fix the past. They rewrite it. She looked at me, confused. I held her hand gently. You see me now. That changes everything. We sat there together for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't hurt, but heals, the kind that comes after truth has finally had its say. Before Amanda left that night, she paused at the door. You didn't raise me to be weak, she said. I just forgot how strong you were. I smiled softly. No, I said. You didn't forget. You just stopped looking. And now she was seeing everything, not just who I had become, but who I'd always been. When the email came in from Chad a week later, I almost didn't open it. The subject line alone made my stomach churn. We need to talk now. I read it slowly, carefully, his words sharp, frantic, and dripping with desperation. I know everything about the building, about the inheritance, about your little secret with Sterling. You think you're clever. You think you can ruin my life and walk away smiling? Let me make something clear. If you don't undo this, I will go to the press, your name, your mother's affair, everything. Let's see how your precious reputation holds up when everyone knows what kind of family you really come from. I stared at the screen in stunned silence. He had finally connected the dots. Somehow, through Amanda or his own digging, he'd discovered the truth. But I wasn't afraid, because I had planned for this moment since the day I bought the building. I forwarded the email to the attorney Diane had recommended when I first set up ML Holdings. By the next morning, Chad received a cease and desist letter. In it were records of every threatening message he had sent to the property office, the falsified documents he tried to submit under a fake law firm's name, and the tampered mailboxes of other tenants that the security cameras had quietly recorded. We didn't need to press criminal charges. Just one defamation and harassment suit was enough. He panicked, and I knew it because Amanda called me the next day. He's gone, she said, her voice shaking. Packed up while I was at work. Left a note saying he was being hunted. Said you ruined his life. He ruined his own, I said quietly. Amanda was silent for a moment. I'm sorry again for ever thinking he deserved my silence. You were scared, I replied. I've been there. Fear makes you small, but you don't have to stay that way. It wasn't long before Chad tried one last desperate act of retaliation, posting vague rants on social media, implying corruption and betrayal. He never named names. He couldn't afford to, not after the second letter from my attorney threatened legal action for every word he published. He went quiet after that, publicly at least. Word came back through mutual connections that he'd taken a job in Houston, starting over with the same arrogance but a little less swagger. Privately, I knew he'd never forget the day he realized the woman he kicked out with 2 suitcases and a tired face now owned the roof over his head, the lease under his name, and the keys to every locked door he'd once slammed in mine. 2 weeks later, unexpectedly, I received another email, this one from Chad as well, but with a very different tone. Margaret, I don't expect you to read this. And I wouldn't blame you if you deleted it immediately. But I need to say something. Even if it's just to get it off my chest, I was wrong. Not just about the rent or about forcing you out. I was wrong about who I was trying to be. My father left us when I was 11, walked out the door, and never looked back. He was weak, and I swore I'd never be weak like him. I'd be strong, successful, in control. But I wasn't strong. I was just cruel. And I'm paying for it now. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that you've taught me something I needed to learn. Chad, I read it 3 times, searching for manipulation, for an angle, but for once, it seemed genuine, the words of a man forced to look in the mirror and recognize someone he didn't want to be. I didn't respond. Some bridges stay burned, and that's as it should be. Amanda, on the other hand, was transforming. She found a small studio apartment of her own, started therapy, joined a community art class. She even painted something for me, an abstract of a phoenix in dark reds and golds. I hung it above my fireplace. We talked more often now, not every day, but when we did, it was real, honest, no more pretending. She was rebuilding her career at the marketing firm, taking on projects she'd been afraid to pursue when Chad was controlling her time. There was a new lightness to her voice, even when she was tired. The last piece of the puzzle came in an envelope 6 months after the confrontation at the building meeting. Another letter, this one from Michael, the property manager. Ms. Pierce, I wanted to inform you that we've had several offers on the property. Real estate values in the area have increased substantially since the renovations. And as you requested, I've been monitoring the market. The attached offer from Westlake Investments is 22% above our initial valuation. Please review at your convenience. Regards, Michael Turner. I sat with the letter for several days, thinking. The building had served its purpose in my life. It had been a symbol, a reclamation, a way to take back power. But now it felt like an anchor to the past, tying me to a story I was ready to close. I called Diane, and we discussed the financial aspects. Then I called a meeting with the property management company. I'd like to accept the offer, I told Michael, but with conditions. I want assurances that current tenants will have their leases honored for at least 2 years, with no dramatic rent increases. He nodded. I'll make that part of the terms. May I ask, is this about moving on? I smiled. It's about moving forward. The final paperwork was signed on a bright, cloudless Tuesday. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a quiet click of a pen, a firm handshake, and the weight of months of grief, betrayal, and silence finally lifting off my shoulders. The money was wired to my account the next day, but I didn't celebrate. Instead, I wrote a check, a large one. Half of the proceeds went to a local shelter for women and children in crisis, the kind of place I wish I had known existed the night I stood on that curb with 2 suitcases and no one to call. I asked them to build a new counseling wing named after my mother, the Eleanor Pierce Center. It was my way of honoring the woman who gave me strength in silence, who hid a lifetime of secrets so that I could one day discover the truth and become something more than what the world expected. The other half I used to buy a small house. It wasn't extravagant, just a charming little 2-bedroom on the same street where I grew up in Cedar Park. Oak trees out front, a porch swing, enough space for quiet, for healing, for growing tomatoes if I ever felt like trying. I also enrolled in a counseling certification program, focusing on helping women rebuild their lives after trauma and loss. The shelter director had been right. My experiences could be a light for others walking similar paths. The day I moved in, Amanda helped carry boxes. She didn't say much, neither did I. But after we finished unpacking, she sat beside me on the porch swing, legs tucked under her, eyes scanning the street like she was trying to recognize the girl she used to be. "I remember riding my bike here," she said softly, "before everything got complicated." I nodded. "You were always safe here." "I forgot how that felt," she whispered. "We didn't talk about Chad. We didn't need to." His chapter had closed without a dramatic ending, just silence. He had disappeared into a new city, a new job, probably a new lie, but not before signing a non-disclosure agreement and quietly dropping his threats. The last thing he wanted was another legal battle, or worse, for the world to see the truth about him. Amanda stayed for dinner. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, like we used to when she was little. She laughed when she burned one side. I laughed when she tried to blame the pan. It was the first real laughter we had shared in years. That night, after she left, I stood at the window holding a cup of tea in both hands, watching the moonlight stretch across the front lawn. And for the first time in a long, long time, I said the words out loud. "I forgive you." Not to Amanda, to myself. Because that was the hardest part. Not rising from the ashes, but learning that I was never the fire they tried to extinguish. I was the spark they underestimated. They taught me that silence was weakness, but I learned how to weaponize it. They tried to erase me, and I became someone they could never forget. I sat down on the couch, opened the diary one last time, and tucked a note inside for Amanda to find someday. You don't need their love to be worthy. You don't need their approval to be strong. You only need the truth, and to never, ever forget who you are. The clock ticked softly in the background. My tea grew cold in my hands, but my heart, it was finally warm. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to win. I just needed to be who I was all along. And now, finally, I was home. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in the newly completed Eleanor Pierce Center, surrounded by women and children who had found safety within its walls. The spring sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. "When I was a child," I began, "my mother used to tell me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise after you've been knocked down." The faces looking back at me were tired but hopeful. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself not so long ago. I didn't understand what she meant until I was nearly 60 years old, until I stood on a curb with nowhere to go and nothing but my own reflection to remind me who I was. From the back of the room, Amanda slipped in quietly. She gave me a small smile and a nod. She was flourishing in her new role as marketing director at a nonprofit that helped women start small businesses. We had dinner together every Sunday now, a tradition we protected fiercely. "What I want each of you to know," I continued, "is that your story isn't over. It's just turning to a new page, and you get to decide what's written next." After the ceremony, as we walked to the car together, Amanda linked her arm through mine. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, honey?" "Would you consider writing down your story? Not just for me, but for the women at the center. I think it could help them." I paused, considering it. "I'm not sure I'm a writer." She smiled. "You taught third grade for 30 years. You're definitely a storyteller." I laughed softly. "I'll think about it." And I did. That night, I sat at my desk and opened a new notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "I never thought I'd be left out in the cold by my own daughter. I never imagined the man she married would strip me of my dignity in my lowest moment and that she would let him. But what they didn't know was that life had one last card for me to play, and when I played it, everything changed." The words came easier than I expected, flowing from some deep well inside me that had been waiting to be tapped. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption, not just mine, but perhaps someone else's too. I wrote late into the night, filling page after page, and as the first light of dawn crept through my window, I realized something profound. The greatest revenge isn't making others suffer for what they've done to you. It's living so fully that the pain they caused becomes just another chapter in a story that keeps getting better. In the end, I didn't just survive being cast aside. I found my true self in the wreckage. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift they never meant to give me.